to start with the poem. Within this temple there is a crowd. There is one who is humble, there is one who is proud, one who is sorry for his sins, another unrepentant sits and grins. From much earthly care I couldn't be free if I could just determine which one is me. Before we embrace our awakened life, we begin to embrace all aspects of who we are in any given moment. We were talking about with Tom this morning that is to be awake is to be alert and to be present to your life. And how many of us go through not even wanting to be present in our lives, not even wanting to know what's going on around us, and we're missing out. We've put ourselves together as personalities through the different experiences that we've had in life. When we have a feeling, feelings describe what is going on inside of us. It happens so often I begin to wonder how disconnected so many of us can become from our feelings. Sometimes it's just the opposite. We get so overwhelmed with our feelings, we can't even identify what our needs are, so we just shut down. Again, our inability to effectively understand our feelings gets in the way of our actions. I don't know how many times when I've been teaching the nonviolent communication where we really are looking at what we're feeling and what we're needing, the number of people that say, I don't know what I'm feeling. I have to grab a list and start reading the list to figure out what they're even feeling. And maybe we've had terrible things that happen. It was safer just to shut down. I know when we were working with the Fiona Project, I had to revisit a lot of feelings that I had not bothered to feel for a while. And it was a good thing. For me, it was like taking a suitcase down from the back of a closet and opening it up and unpacking all those feelings that I had just shut down and put away. And many times when we do this is when we feel safe enough to do it. Because a lot of times, if you've got too many crises going on at one time, that's not the time to do it. You have to sort through what's going on in the present moment. But when you feel safe, when you feel secure, when you're feeling supported, that's the time to take a moment and look at what is going on inside. Robert Brummett is one of my favorite teachers from Unity Village. And he lists a way to embrace our feelings and needs so we no longer need to numb out or shut down. He describes emotions as loyal soldiers fighting a battle for us. They are remembering the situations of the long past and they are trying to protect us from pain. They are totally unaware that the war is over. The temple in the poem is describing us. We've got all these feelings inside. And when we discover what drives us into positive actions, then we show up looking one particular way. When we discover what drives us in a negative way, that's how we show up. But the choice goes where? With us. We also begin to be aware of what drives us when we are stressed and experiencing less than feelings and needs, and we show up in a different way. To express from our awakened selves, we learn how we handle our less than attractive sides of our personality. I couldn't find the direct quote, but one of my favorite stories about the Buddha is that he was, after his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he was walking into a town and a man was just in awe of this man. And he went up to him and said, "Who are you? Are you a god?" And Buddha said, "No." "Well then, are you a man?" And he said, "No." He said, "Well then what are you?" He said, "I'm awake. I'm awake." One reason we are looking at this analysis is to look at your own feelings and needs. How many times when I've taught the nonviolent communication class do I see the frustration on people's faces, how disconnected they are? We grab our list of feelings and try to find something that we can connect to. But it doesn't really summarize unless we really take a moment and stop and maybe do some processes that could help us unravel what we're feeling. Many times we don't have an idea that the present situation that is going on that brings up these emotions are from the past, not the present. So we react accordingly. And in his book, The Quest for Wholeness, Robert Brummett says this: the Buddha recognized how any spiritual teaching is subject to misuse. One of the Buddha's sermons is named The Simile of a Snake. It refers to the proper use and the misuse of spiritual teachings. He said that if a snake is grasped by the tail, it may bite us, but if we grasp it by the back of the head, we can handle it safely. He went on to say that any spiritual teaching is similar. If used unwisely, it can bite us. That is, it can create suffering rather than healing. We must grasp every spiritual teaching behind the head. That is, we must use it as it was meant to be used. It must be understood as it was by the person who originated the teaching. Any spiritual teaching is subject to misunderstanding and misuse. The misuse of a spiritual teaching often creates suffering rather than healing. So that's to look at when we're feeling these things and we are angry, or we are wanting to put some person down, or we want to make them feel as bad as we do. It's because we're coming from that suitcase that has the hidden feelings tucked away. But they want to be healed. They want us to know that they are there. There's a cage within us that contains, for me it was the suitcase, maybe for you it's the cage, and where we have internalized all these past feelings. Our thoughts of less than, even our judgments of others, are reflections of that internalized cage. And again, Robert Brummett says, oops, let me get the right page. Never mind. Oh, 101, I'm sorry. During medieval times, researchers known as alchemists sought a secret process that they believed would turn base metals such as lead into gold. A few of these alchemists, however, were seeking something much more profound. These researchers were studying the processes whereby our base human consciousness could be transformed into a golden spiritual consciousness. They saw that human life is the laboratory wherein this process takes place. And they saw that every human challenge is an opportunity for converting the lead of our human personality into the gold of our spiritual essence. We will see that every experience of suffering is an opportunity for transformation. Each one of us can be that alchemist. Isn't that neat? To transform the pain into that golden light of understanding and of healing. How many of us here journal? Anybody journal? Yeah. I never was much at it, but I have been journaling a lot in these past few years. And there are many ways to do it. There's suggestions that people have given us, but it really boils down to what our way is. But in The Artist's Way, Julie Cameron suggests you write out 3 pages longhand and just do stream of consciousness and see what comes up. I like Robert Brummett's approach. He says, to have our hidden parts speak to us, we use journaling. When we are highly critical of someone else's behavior, we give that judgment a voice and dialogue with it in our journal. Give the judge free rein to be critical and judgmental and condemning. Then switch. Have another voice. Use compassionate communication or spiritual principle and just let them dialogue back and forth. We finally get to the point where we realize that all the judge is trying to do is protect us from feeling pain. Through this type of journaling, we find we give rise to our voices of feelings and even the needs at work. As we become more self-aware, we recognize our feelings in the moment and can step back prior to verbalizing the judge that we all contain. That's just one of many processes. So I wanted to ask you, how do you journal? Do you journal in a different way for those that do it? Do you just do stream of consciousness? Do you do a voice going back and forth? How does journaling work in your life? Yeah, Asha.
when I do it like a letter, so I call it like a wisdom dialogue, and I'll write, "Dear angels, this is what I'm dealing with, and I would greatly appreciate any insight or input that you have." And then I just know, no matter what comes up, I write it down and I just keep going. And often I will find pretty remarkable things that surprise me. You know, and I have had some like contamination, I'll call it, where it's like, yeah, no, what's speaking now is not definitely for my higher good, and you can tell because you can kind of feel it, but it works really well.
Oh, good. That's a great way of doing it. Somebody else? Yeah,
Mine
yeah.
is similar. I write "Dear God" and friends, and I just write whatever I'm feeling and just ask for some guidance.
Okay. And do you get it when you continue writing?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, good.
Even if it's later, like in my dreams, because I'll do it at night.
And then take it down to your subconscious and let your dreams answer. That's a neat way of doing it.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Someone, yeah.
I do that too, and in your way too, and sometimes I write a letter to myself.
Oh, nice.
And that I try to just take from a higher perspective. Just, or sometimes it just morphs into that. It starts out "Dear God" and it becomes "Dear Lisa." So,
One and the same.
Yes. So.
Yeah, that's like the letters from God. I remember when we first started doing them, they were called letters to God, and I looked at that as kind of a pleading type of thing. I want to have the letter from God, that when I tune into that subconscious, then I write down all the things that I'm hearing, and then when we get the letters back, it's so interesting to look at them, because yes, they've happened, but they've happened in a way that I couldn't even have imagined, I wasn't imagining when I originally got the message. So, I mean, there's lots of ways of doing this. Somebody else, you have a different way that you do it. Yeah, Jean.
It's a little bit of this, I think, more automatic writing, or streaming.
Stream of consciousness.
And what helps me the most is because sometimes I just feel so full, and there's so much going on, so I don't really have a particular intention, other than I just need to release. And then it seems like when that happens, there's a clearing that happens, and then information seems to be downloading more readily, because now there is a space. But it's usually, and I might even start writing, I don't really have a clue what's going on right now, and then I just keep writing almost mindlessly, but not really. It's just coming. And then after a while, it's like, okay, and the information, I think, that's being offered to me is not necessarily going to happen in the writing in that moment, but later on, it's like I'll start having more intuitive senses of things, or ahas, or awakenings.
Awakening.
And then I'll journal like, okay, now there's more specific. So it's a little different in that way.
That's good. That's good. I mean, like I said, there's all kinds of ways of doing it, but the one way that is the most successful is the way that works for you. And so you don't have to, did you get a Kleenex here? You don't have to say, oh, well, this is exactly the way Julie Cameron said, I got to do it this way, or this is the way Robert Brummett said, I have to do it that way. You can always start with somebody's idea of how to journal, but then as it evolves. Sometimes I'm doing like a letters from God. I'm just kind of listening, stream of consciousness, and sometimes I'm just writing affirmations. That's kind of clear, just an affirmation over and over and over again. That kind of calms me down. So the journaling doesn't have to look the same every time you do it. Anybody else have a way that they would like to share?
Sometimes I've been confused about journaling, which sometimes brings up negative thoughts, and I've learned a lot about scripting, which is more journaling that something has already happened, something good has already happened. So I've kind of done it in two different books, like one's a negative and one's the positive, and that's probably not the truth at all. But does that make sense?
Well, that's why I like Robert's way. I thought it was like giving that negative a voice and dialogue with it. Well, where is this coming from? And then what you may go back is to an original situation where that opinion was developed and wasn't resolved within you. And so I thought that I'd never heard of Robert's way, because I've always heard of stream of consciousness type of thing. But that's interesting. So do you have two separate journals? Okay. This is my time to be negative and let it all out, let the judge out.
This is the real world kind of.
And here's my spiritual awakened self. You can call one the Book of Awakened Self, and the other one is the dark side. Anybody else have a way that they like to do? Are we complete on that? Well, I've got one poem I'd like to end with. And again, it's the story of the Buddha. The Buddha seems to have captured this idea of awakening. Once upon a time, there lived a very wise sage. His home was, of course, a temple in the Himalayas. His wisdom was renowned. Tales of his great wisdom had spread throughout the land. It was even said that there was no question he could not answer correctly. Upon hearing this, a very wily young lad from a nearby village requested an audience with the sage. He was granted his request, and he stood before the sage. He held his hands behind his back and put forth a question. "O great sage, I'm holding a bird behind me. Is the bird I'm holding alive or dead?" The bird was actually alive. If the sage responded dead, the lad would simply produce the living bird and prove him wrong. If the sage responded alive, the clever and ruthless lad would wring the bird's neck and produce a dead bird. The boy stood with a smug smile on his face, waiting for the sage to reply. The wise man closed his eyes for several seconds. Then a charitable smile appeared on his face. He opened his eyes and replied gleefully, "Son, the answer to that question lies in your hands." So the question that we have about awakening, to be that person connected with the divine, also lies in your hands. Let's take this into meditation.